Hey everybody, it's Peter, and in today's video we're going to compare the Kawasaki KLX 300 to the Kawasaki VersysX-300. These are two 300cc, roughly, motorcycles that definitely have some crossover in what they're good for, and they may or may not be something that you're comparing to each other, but what I'm going to try to do in this video is help you decide which one's best for you and which one's best in which way, because I think there's the obvious, well, this is more dirt bike and that's more touring bike, but there's also a lot of things to consider about why one is better than the other, and you may find yourself at the end of this video leaning more towards this with some more valid reasons, or leaning more towards that with some more valid reasons, because I know for myself, I kind of go back and forth between which one of these I would buy as maybe like a second motorcycle for me, because they're both trail capable, they're both a lot of fun, and they both have pros and cons that are built into the design that may or may not matter for the type of riding that you want to do. So in this video, we're going to go over these bikes in detail and compare them. And I want to thank Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports, who gives me complete access to the entire vehicle lineup here. And if you have questions about either one of these vehicles, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what your questions are, because I can answer your questions both in the comment section but also in future videos. So I've already done videos, a number of videos on the KLX. I've done one other one on the VersysX, which just showed up recently. These are both 2023 bikes, so we're going to compare them in depth. Let's get going with that comparison. So let's just start by giving these labels that Kawasaki's already kind of given them. This is what we call a dual sport bike, street and trail bike, whatever you want to call it, but let's call it dual sport. This is a bit of an odd one. This is what I would consider to be in the adventure bike category. Now, that adventure bike category is rapidly evolving. There are adventure bikes that are far more off-road capable than even this thing is. There's adventure bikes that are far more touring bikes than either of these bikes are. But the reality is that an adventure bike is really something that is capable of long travel and capable of going off-road. And if it's just down to that basic definition, that's what this is. And of course, this one, dual sport, much less capable of that longer travel, so therefore more of that dirt bike for the street. But again, pros and cons in each one. So we're going to go through in detail. What I want to do is start with the VersysX-300 and then move to the KLX and then bring them back in together. And part of the reason I want to start is let's just talk about the engines in both these. Although they're both sort of 300cc engines, in the Kawasaki lineup, when you see a 650 engine, everything except for the KLR uses the same engine. When you see a 300 engine, there are different engines as well, and it can vary. So this is the only 300 engine like it in the Kawasaki lineup. All the other 300s are like this. And the differences between the two are that this is a single cylinder engine and this is a twin cylinder engine. This one makes far more horsepower. This one has better low down torque. So what that means really for riding is you're going to be able to wheelie on this one a little bit. You're going to be able to really have that kind of get up and go instantly down low in the revs, whereas this one, probably not going to wheelie on it, but it does have far better highway capabilities, far better high speed capabilities, and that can really kind of, right away make one better for you than the other. But let's walk through the Versys first, and then compare it down to the KLX, and then kind of go back and forth to help you narrow down not just the differences in the classes, but the specific differences that may make a difference to where you ride and how you ride. So starting with the VersysX-300, I want to be clear that the Versys lineup in the Kawasaki lineup is an interesting one, because although the bikes look similar from the 300 to the 650 to the 1000, they are all, in my opinion, a different purpose. The VersysX-300, that X really stands for more of that crossover into that adventure style-ish bike. This is the only one that I would take off-road because it has tires that are more capable off-road. I've owned the Versys 650 in the past. To me, that is a sort of an upright sport tourer. It's kind of nimble, good handling, that kind of thing. And then the Versys 1000 leans far more to the long distance touring with its great wind protection, really powerful 4-cylinder engine, and things like electronic cruise control. It's got electronic suspension. It's far more of a long distance cruiser, and it's a fairly large bike. So there are differences in the Versys lineup, so don't think that because I'm talking about the VersysX-300 that you could just move to the 650 and get the same thing. That's a different bike, and I have videos on that one. So let's talk about this as just about trail capable first of all. This one has what I would call 80-20 tires. Now, that's a term used in the industry. I don't know if these specific ones are labeled as that, but when I say 80-20, really 80% road, 20% off-road. They are called, where's the name here? They are called Trail Winner. That is the name on them. So they are definitely something that you could take on a trail, I suppose, but it would really depend on the trail. To me, what this bike is great for is going from on-road, paved roads, to rougher roads, to gravel roads and dirt roads. This is the kind of thing that can really go down just about any road. Even though the tires say trail, it's going to limit the type of trail that I would go down on this bike, but the idea is it doesn't matter where you're headed. If you see a cool little road sort of maybe up near the coast or up to a lighthouse or something like that, you can head down that in this, and it's got the tires that are capable for that. Now, if you were going to go a little further off-road, you could always upgrade the tires a little bit and go more of a 50-50 on-road, off-road like some of the other adventure bikes that are out there. But there are some compromises, and we're going to talk about some of those compromises first before we look at some of the sort of more touring capabilities. So let's start with the compromises. So when I talk about the compromises on this bike for a dirt bike, for a dirt-friendly bike, obviously we've got tires here which again are not as knobby as the full off-road type tires. You also have some sort of illusion of protection here. This is a plastic panel that is just a flexible panel. This is not a shield in any way. And in fact, it actually doesn't go around the bottom. It's open here on the bottom. So we'll show you on the KLX how you have a little bit more protection here. And that's really something to keep in mind because you also have an oil filter right here. The KLX has a completely different style of oil filter. So even if you were to upgrade these to more 50-50 tires, you do have to be aware that any stones you're shooting up here, that's going to be a problem. And the Kawasaki accessories package does not offer a shield right here. There may be shields available from the aftermarket, but there's not one straight from Kawasaki. So if you're going off-road, it's far more dirt road than shooting up stones gravel road, but this is more street bike orientation. This is the former Ninja 300 engine, and it's designed to be perfectly fine on the street. But if you get into bashing rocks type things here, you're going to damage your exhaust, you're going to possibly damage your oil filter, and of course if you do that, you're going to have engine issues. So this is a light off-roader. The other thing you'll notice is there's less ground clearance. Now, still pretty good for a street bike, but less so than the KLX. So that is the biggest compromise between tires and this section here that you have to be aware of. And if your type of off-road riding is going to put any of this in danger, this is not the bike for you. So if that compromise isn't going to affect the way you ride off of the paved roads, then this probably is the bike for you. So first thing I'm going to do is jump across it here. If I jump across here, it's a relatively tall bike, so is the KLX, but I'm flat-footing here. I'm about 6 feet tall, so you could be well shorter than me and still be able to get your toes to the ground. Not an issue there. But overall, this is going to be a more pleasurable bike to ride long term. And you've got a few things that kind of make that difference here. You do have a windshield up here, which is going to take some of that wind and pressure off of your upper body. If you're traveling longer distances at highway speeds, you've got more horsepower, and then having that extra wind protection is really going to make a difference. The other thing you have here is a little bit, well, a much better passenger capacity or passenger seating area here. Again, you're probably not going to be touring with 2 people on this bike, but certainly taking someone else around town, this is going to be a more comfortable area. And then the real thing is this luggage rack is standard, and it allows you to take all of the luggage you would need on both the rack and on here. Now you can get accessory side bags, you can get accessory top case, but even if you didn't spend any more money, you can strap all kinds of things down here, from a tent to a sleeping bag to bags and luggage, and you can get those side cases if you want to and put things down here. There's a lot of things you can do to really make this a more versatile bike if you don't need as much off-road commitment. So this is going to be much better at that. And there's also little things like a little area where you can put a 12-volt port in here. There's a little area where you can put extra driving lights down there. So you can put little LED driving lights with a crash bar up here. Again, if you crash either of these bikes, these panels are more likely to break than on the dirt bike style KLX, but you can get some crash guard protection, so if it does drop, you can pick it up and hopefully have minimal damage. But overall, again, far better long-term, long driving type bike with a lot more versatility if you don't need that much off-road space. Let's pull the KLX in here for a second and look at a few little advantages there, and we'll talk about both of them together again. So the KLX 300 looks like a dirt bike with lights, but there are a few differences as well. One thing to remember is these tires certainly are much more aggressive than on something like the VersysX-300, but these are still road legal tires, and that's one thing to remember. Even though this is sort of dirt bike looking, you still need to have approved on-road tires on a bike like this because it's an on-road bike. So these are still far more aggressive than the VersysX-300, but they are a step down and a step towards more street friendliness than a traditional dirt bike. Rear seat back here, not very large. You do have a little toolkit here, but you don't have the storage there. Now having this exhaust tucked up high, of course, if you to drop it, that kind of thing, there's no exhaust down here to get really damaged. Up there, there's these flexible panels if you drop it there. So you don't need to buy the extra bars and crash package if you're gonna take this in a place where you might be dropping it or something like that. Less wind protection. We're going to take a look at the dashes and the different features in there, but let's go down and take a look down here like we did with the other bike and talk about the advantages off-road on this one before we talk about some disadvantages on-road. So getting the same view here with the tires in here, you can see far more aggressive tires. Those are going to help. You've also got, to me, much thicker spokes and probably more of them. Maybe not thicker, but certainly there's a lot of spokes there. So again, anytime you have a spoked wheel, that's what you want for off-road. The alloy wheels are something you don't want. So there is that. But here's the real difference here. First of all, no oil filter. The oil filter here is built into the engine. It's a cartridge style thing, so it's all protected behind the hard engine casing. It's not exposed like on a street bike. You also have, this is all standard stuff. This is a bit of a crash bar. If you were to hit a rock or something like that, it's just gonna bounce right off. It's not gonna damage anything in there. Even the foot pegs, you have the sort of grippy foot pegs here with, when I say grippy, they are sort of toothed metal, as opposed to on the Versys they have rubber coating or rubber filling on them to help with vibrations. Again, this is a single cylinder engine as well. The dual cylinder engine is going to be or the twin cylinder engine is going to be a better high revving engine, high horsepower. When you're on the trail, really off-road, you want that instant torque down low. That's what this has, but it will run out of power on the highway at very high speeds. So again, it'll go speed limits, it'll go legal speed limits, that's not an issue, but you're gonna be running it up in the higher revs. So real difference here is all of that. And again, if you're going to a place where you might be crashing into the bottom here, this is the only bike you need. So now I'm going to jump across this bike, and this bike is one of the ones that's kind of tricky. It looks like a very tall seat height, and by the specs it is, but let me just hop on for a second here. You do need to be tall to kind of climb over, but there is a little bit of plushness to the suspension that does shrink it down. Now, I am slightly tippy-toed on this bike compared to on the VersysX-300, so it still sits taller, but if you're my height, it's totally manageable. If you're a lot shorter than me, then again, that Versys has that really scooped out seat that's going to be lower. The other thing with the VersysX seat is it's going to be more comfortable on a longer trip. So dirt bikes have narrow seats for a reason. You can stand on the pegs, you can really kind of maneuver around and really like move this bike around. It's such a lightweight bike while you're riding. The difference on a street bike is you're going to be sitting virtually the whole time, so they can design it out a little bit more for comfort. This one is not as comfortable on a longer trip. It also has a smaller tank and it has a few less features in the dash here for those longer trips. So let's look at some differences in the dashes, and then we'll start narrowing it down who should buy each bike and why. So let's start off here with the dash of the KLX 300. We'll turn the key on, and you have a pretty good dash for a dual sport bike. Something like even the KLR doesn't even have a tachometer. Now, to be fair, some of these single cylinder bikes, they make their power down low. You don't really need to rev them all out, but this one has a tachometer, has a clock in there, has a nice digital speedometer. It's all, of course, backlit, which you can kind of see there. And then you have the odometer, you have trip A, and you have trip B. So again, decent for a dual sport, but nothing more. You know, you've got your warning lights of what you need. It is still liquid cooled here, which I think is important. And then you have high beam signal lights, low fuel light, engine light, all the basics right there. Now let's take a look at the dash on the VersysX-300. So on the VersysX-300, you will see a little bit more glare here. I'm battling with some studio lights here. It's actually not as bad as it looks on the camera. I don't think it'll be an issue for anybody actually driving there. You do have sort of the traditional tachometer here, which I like, and you'll notice it revs right up to 12,000 RPM redline. A lot of your power is going to be in that 5,000 and above range for this bike. You do have a gear indicator here, you've got your digital speedometer, and then up top here you have, let's just hit the buttons here, your trip A, trip B, and odometer. So all of that's identical other than the gear indicator right there. Stepping down here is where you get a few extras. You have the average fuel efficiency. It's currently labeled as kilometers per liter, and then you have the range or distance to empty, which is an approximation based on how you have been driving, and then the kilometers per liter in instant. So instant, average, and range. And again, I believe that can be set to liters per 100 kilometers as well. So that is sort of the first difference that you're going to see is you have a little bit extra touring capability with that fuel efficiency information. And then if I scroll, there we go, we can kind of get it in here. Very top right of your screen is a little dummy switch that you could add those driving lights on, and again a 12-volt area where you could add those on. Again, that's going to add to the cost of this bike, but even if you don't get them when you buy the bike, these are Kawasaki accessories you can add in the future. So it's just things to keep in mind that again make this a little bit better touring bike. One other little difference I want to show you the controls just on this bike, because there's a couple extras here on this bike that you don't get on the KLX. So we're zoomed in really close here on the Versys, and you can see a little trigger back here. That will flash your high beam on and off. This, of course, is high beam, high and low. So on the KLX, you have this switch for signals, and you have the horn right there, and that's it. This one adds that little trigger to flash your high beam, helps get people's attention, as well as a sort of flash to pass feature. And then you have the hazard lights as well, which on an adventure type bike, when you're traveling, maybe you have a GPS mounted to this thing or something like that, you want to reset that kind of stuff. You may stop on the side of the road. It just allows you a little extra safety to have that piece. So again, these would be standard on both bikes. Adding this little trigger here and adding those hazard lights is extra but included on the VersysX. So let's talk about who these bikes are for. Well, you may have sat there and said, hey, these aren't competitive at all, and if that's your, that's how you feel, you're 100% right. Somebody who's interested in this bike may not be interested in this bike, and the same thing goes the other way. If somebody's interested in this bike, they may not be interested in this bike. But I do think there's a crossover segment of people like myself that have to decide what do they want in a lightweight, which is the big benefit of these, adventure or off-road type bike. So for me, the appeal of sticking around my house and going to all these areas in New Brunswick and Fredericton, New Brunswick, where they have these dirt roads that lead to really rough roads that lead to trails, this one really appeals to me. The question is, do I want to spend money on a bike for just around near my house? Because this one is not going to travel as far, as comfortably as this one. So then the question becomes, does someone like myself go with something like this, where you can hit those dirt roads and all those kinds of things a couple hours away on the coast, by the ocean? And something like this would definitely appeal to me in that scenario. It also allows me to have the ability to maybe go camping on this, motorcycle camping. And it's, although this is a little heavier, it's a very lightweight bike that's easy to maneuver. And I really like lightweight, low displacement bikes for kind of traveling around and adventuring. I like the idea that you can add luggage here, but I do think there's a crossover segment of people that want to leave the road, but have to be honest with themselves about what type of road leaving things you want to do. Like I said, around your own home, close to home, within an hour or so of home, this one's going to be probably the most appealing because it can literally go anywhere, including down the dirt road, across the trail to new highways, new roads, and do that. But this one does give you the ability to do things that this one can't as far as distance. And that's really the thing. If you want a bike that's really versatile and you're going to be primarily on roads but want to head down a few scenic places, this one's going to shine. If you want something that really can get into those off-road areas, then this one's going to just shine. So when we talk about who's going to buy it, it really boils down to who or what type of riding you want to do long-term when you put your money down on a bike. So there you go. If you're interested in either of these bikes, let me know in the comments section. And if you have questions that I didn't get to, let me know as well. I'm going to put two links up here, one to at least one of the reviews I've done of the KLX, another to another review that I did of the VersysX. There will be more videos on these bikes coming up in the future, so make sure you hit subscribe. And if you have questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll make sure I answer it both in the comments and in future videos. Thanks everybody for watching.